Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Ontario Region's Nature Conservancy of Canada's call all about owls. We're going to be getting started in a few minutes. We know we have close to 200 people on the call, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I'm going to keep telling some cool owl facts, and I hope for those of you who have kids in the call, this is interesting. I just wanted to mention before that we actually booked this call the day before Earth Day to celebrate Earth Day, and because we figured a lot of people would be outside tomorrow. And I'm sure we are all missing the outdoors in these very unusual times. But may I suggest that if you aren't following us on Facebook, please do sign up. And if you're not getting our regular e-blasts, please consider signing up for those as well. We're sharing little nature breaks, especially on Facebook. And while it's not as good as getting outdoors, in these days of social distancing, it's still a nice break. My next cool owl fact: many people know that owls are silent flyers whose velvety feathers just slide past one another. But it's actually the comb structure at the end of their feathers that let them move through the air without any flapping sound. That means they're silent and deadly, and sometimes they just appear out of nowhere. We're just going to wait 1 or 2 more minutes to kick the call off. Thank you for joining us, and I'll be back in a moment. Before we officially get started, I want to just take a moment to say a special thank you to our leaders in conservation donors who joined us on the call today. These are donors who give us at least $1,000 annually. These gifts help us deliver conservation results across Ontario, and it's funds that we can rely on. We truly appreciate your support. And I also want to say thank you to all of those of you who put NCC in your will or made another planned gift. Thank you so much for your trust and commitment for conservation. So the last fun fact I wanted to mention before we get started is that did you know owls, like the barred owl, are also engaged in social distancing? They have their own version of social distancing inside their family unit. They protect their territories where it's okay for only them and their families to live and hunt. Imagine that's a family who all live at the same address. Typically, this covers about 100 to 200 acres, which is the size of a typical NCC nature reserve here in Ontario. And the barred owls are known for chasing other owls out of their territory while calling loudly and tackling them feet first. Ouch. All right, I've now heard that we have just about 300 people on the call, which is great. And so let me just welcome everyone to joining us. My name is Jill Marie Dimmick, and I work for the Nature Conservancy of Canada here in Ontario Region. I'm delighted to be your host for this call. We all hope that you're keeping well during this challenging time, and I'm glad you found your way here today. This call is really for you, all of our supporters. This is our chance to thank you and give you an update on our Leave Your Landmark campaign, provide a snapshot of some great recent successes, and share some of our work on the ground. We also hope that this call gives you a chance to turn off the news and celebrate something good. I've worked for NCC for about 14 years, and I think it's the fundamentally optimistic nature of our work, the tangible elements, the timeless, it's foundational, that inspire me to spend my time trying to focus on conservation to make the world a better place. For those of you who've joined us in the past, you may have noticed we're focusing our calls on species. The last time, turtles, this time, owls. It's because so many species benefit so significantly from our work that your support makes possible. I'm delighted today to be joined by 2 of our land management experts, Kristen Ferguson and Mark Stav. They'll be talking about some of the owl species found in Ontario and sharing some more fun facts and stories from the field. But we also know that it's not just staff and donors who are supporting our work, it's also our volunteers. So I wanted to recognize our many volunteers who unfortunately won't be joining us right now for our conservation volunteer events, as we've delayed those, but also our board members who dedicate so much of their time and resources to helping us. Some people on the call might not be as familiar with the Nature Conservancy of Canada as some of our longtime supporters. So I wanted to ask Kristen Ferguson if she could do a short introduction to the Nature Conservancy of Canada and what we do. Kristen? Sure thing. Thanks, Jill. So the Nature Conservancy of Canada is working to protect the country's most ecologically significant landscapes and the species that they sustain. Since 1962, the NCC and its partners have helped conserve 14 million hectares, which is 35 million acres, coast to coast to coast. We focus on lands that are most critical to the health and abundance of the natural world that we all depend on. Here in Ontario, NCC has helped protect more than 80,000 hectares, that's 200,000 acres, and that's from the North Shore of Lake Superior to Pelee Island and Lake Erie. NCC is working to protect our province's most significant natural landscapes. And by investing in conservation, we're ensuring that our natural world remains a home for wildlife, a haven for recreation, and a vital resource that, as we speak, is cleaning the air we breathe and filtering the water we drink. The importance of that, at least to me, has never really seemed as obvious as it does today, when it's just that much tougher to access and nature seems, at least a window pane away. And conservation really is a team sport. NTC works strategically to support other organizations, deliver conservation they're doing in their priority areas, and as well, we're directly acquiring and caring for key properties in areas that we've identified as the most important places to work in Ontario due to the best available science. And then we manage them for the long term, and that is really the forever piece of our work. Our goal is to have future generations of Canadians enjoying the same rich natural world that you and I are privileged to enjoy today, from hikes to butterflies, to forests, and to owls. Thanks so much, Kristen. I appreciate you and Mark calling in from your home offices. And before we get started, I'm wondering if you could both introduce yourselves, what you do at NCC, and your favorite species of owl. So, Kristen, I'll go back to you. Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm Kristen Ferguson. I've been a program director with NCC for over 8 years, and I've been working here for over 12 years. My primary focus in the program director role is on land acquisition and stewardship, and this has been in a variety of areas across this amazing province, from the GTA up to Georgian Bay, to the deep reaches of southwestern Ontario, and the vast shorelines of northern Ontario. And okay, so you asked what my favorite owl species. I'm going to pick the barred owl. And barred owls, they just seem to have a way of always finding me when I'm out and about in the field and I hear a funny noise, something in the trees above me. Inevitably, I look up and there's a barred owl. And part of the reason the barred owl makes my favorite list is because its call is so incredibly strange. It's asking a question. It's asking, who cooks for you? So I'll do my best to do a bit of an impression of a barred owl call. And maybe you guys have heard this when you've been in the summer. So, woo, 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 woo. It's quite a distinctive call. And when you get two barred owls together, they actually start doing something called duetting, which several species of owls will get involved in. They sort of are taking their calls to the next level. They're shouting at each other, and they're sort of building off one another's call. And the barred owl duet call actually sounds more like monkeys. So if you ever hear this, you'll know what you're listening to. Okay, bear with me. Okay, thanks, Jill. That was great. Mark, can you introduce yourself as well? Mark, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
That's awesome. Thanks, Kristen. That call was just amazing. So we have a number of owl species in the province, and I've been lucky enough to work in Central Ontario region, studying the properties that we've been caring for, etc. As a program director, I help, like Kristen, acquire property and help steward those properties looking into the future. And it covers the geography from the Oak Ridges Moraine, which is a long ridge of landscape across the north of Lake Ontario, over to Northumberland County, where we have a place called the Rice Lake Plains, the beautiful limestone landscape north of Napanee, and even around Prince Edward County and the islands and shores of the eastern Lake Ontario coast. In the past, I've actually done some research on flying squirrels, which are another creature that's active at night. So I spent a lot of nights out in the wild, and I got to hear and experience a lot of these great owls. So my favorite owl species, hard to pick, but I do love to hear the beautiful, tiny, soft, wet owl. And their call is well, I'll try it. I'll give it a go. Kind of like this. It's kind of like the ever-ready bird. Just keeps going and going and going. I'd love to hear that call in the wild.
Great. Thanks so much. Kristen, back to you. Can you tell us a bit more about some other owl species, particularly the ones that are native here to Ontario?
Yeah, sure thing, Jill. Sorry about that. That is the curse of the conference call line, isn't it? So aside from the two owls Mark and I mentioned, the barred owl and the saw-whet owl, there are 9 other owl species native to Ontario for 11 total. So I'll go through the list, and maybe you guys are familiar with some of these, but I promise there won't be a quiz at the end. So the great gray owl is our biggest. That's an owl that can grow up to 2.5 feet tall, so like a good almost meter off the ground with a really deep barreling call and a big flat face. There's the barn owl, which is a rare species, more confined to southern Ontario, and its call actually sounds more like a hiss. There's the great horned owl, which is another one that people may recognize the call of. So the great horned owl, you may hear calling at night with another question, different from the barred owl. This time he's asking, who's awake? And then saying, me too. So sort of, woo, 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 woo. Then there's also the boreal owl, found more in the northern reaches of the province. The northern hawk owl, which occasionally makes an appearance down here in southern Ontario, but again is largely in the north. There is the short-eared owl, an owl found more in grassland habitats, who has a call like a cat yipping. To complement the short-eared owl, we also have a long-eared owl, which makes a very classic owl sound. And we have a snowy owl that comes down in the winter months, that big, beautiful white owl. We've had a few extras of those over the past few years. And then finally, the eastern screech owl, which is another favorite, pretty common. You might get lucky enough to hear it. I know I sometimes do get to hear them here in Guelph. And the eastern screech owl has a call that sounds a bit like a horse whinny that we were hearing as we waited for people to join the call today. So I'll do my best impression of the eastern screech owl at night, sort of along the lines of, woo, woo, woo. And those are the Ontario owls.
Thanks so much. When we were talking about owls before, we were talking about the one that sounded like a horse whinny. And that was by far my favorite. I'm wondering if you can do that. I know it sounded a little bit more like a ghost to me, and then I'll get Mark to play it for us. Could you do that call for me, Kristen?
I'm sure you're going to put my skills to the test. Okay, so the horse whinny or the ghost whinny of the eastern screech owl sounds like this. Ooh, according to me, and according to Mark, it sounds like. Ooh.
That sounds a lot more like a horse. All right. Mark, what type of habitats do owls make their homes in? Are there any threats to those habitats you could tell us about?
Thanks, Jill. Before we got this call going, I talked to our science specialist and asked Vari McFarland to check out our database to see where owls are in our properties. And they're actually almost all of our species are represented in our nature reserves. So the forest nesting species in central and southern Ontario include the barred owl, the great horned, saw-whet, screech, and long-eared owl. And as you go further north of past Algonquin Park, north of North Bay, into the boreal forest, you get the small boreal owl. And as the trees start to disappear in great northern wetlands and subarctic tundra, the treeless landscape started to appear, that's where you have the northern hawk owl, great gray, and snowy owls. As Kristen mentioned, there are some grassland habitats as well. And we have the barn owl, which tends to like that kind of habitat, and also the short-eared. We actually had a short-eared record in one of our nature reserves north of Napanee. So really the threats to these species are really threats to many other species, including hawks, for example, other predatory species. Habitat loss, for example, loss of old forests in particular, as well as loss of grassland habitat. Now, the forest owls that do live on in existing woodlands, they often depend on large trees and trees with cavities. Now, these types of trees can become quite rare in some woodlands that have been cut over for lumber, pulp, or firewood, for example. And also grassland species themselves can be disturbed by people, for example, dogs, and we often like to ensure people keep their dogs on a leash, or they could be impacted by certain farming activities, for example.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Making sure I'm not on mute. You talked about some of the threats to owl survival. Mark, what are some of the things we can actually do to protect owls and other habitats?
You know, the Nature Conservancy of Canada is really committed to the habitat protection side of things, and that's really a tremendous support for these species right across the landscape. So in particular, some of the older, larger forests are really important to protect, and that ensures that there's a whole range of habitats for the variety of species that do depend on these forests. So great woodlands like the Bacchus Woods down in southwestern Ontario, a fine example of the whole array of owl species that could live there in the area. Happy Valley Forest, north of Toronto, also a large protected space, has a number of different species there, including the great barred owl. And even smaller woodlands like Gillies Grove out in Arnprior has had a barred owl and great horned owl records. So habitat protection is really important. And also protecting certain components of the habitat is also important. One of the things that's changed over the years is that forestry operations have developed sustainability criteria, or ways to do things that will help look after wildlife while also harvesting tree species. So, for example, there are guidelines in many operations to protect large trees or large trees with cavities, which would be homes for large woodpeckers. And those holes that then are abandoned eventually can be used by things like the saw-whet owl, screech owl, or barred owl.
That's great, Mark. And it's Kristen here. You got me thinking a bit about what private landowners can do on their properties to protect owls. So if you've got some potential owl habitat on your property, you may have it and not even know it. So if you've got an old tree that potentially has a hole kind of drilled into it, that could be a great place for an owl to hang out. You might have trees where you could potentially install an owl box. A few meters up a tree, you can make these boxes out of untreated wood. There's some great templates online, and you may get owls joining you throughout all the various seasons we've got here in Canada, where they're busy with different parts of their life cycles. And I think once you know you've got an owl around, or you start being able to listen to owls now that you've heard some of their calls and what they might sound like, you can keep a window open at night, see what you find, keep your eye out on those roads at nighttime, see if anything flies by. And when you do identify an owl, every citizen can use one of the apps that we recommend for your phone, like iNaturalist or eBird. These are databases that allow everybody to become a research scientist. So you would go, I heard that "Who Cooks for You" call and pop in, I saw a barred owl. And so you're actually helping with research initiatives all across North America for researchers who are looking at barred owl conservation or behaviors, for example. And I think, if you're near trees and fields, you might just start keeping an extra eye out. Or if you're somebody who lives in a more urban area, on your weekend hikes or camping trips, that might be just the time once we're all able to head out into the wilderness again. Another thing people can do is support conservation. Like Mark mentioned, habitat protection is really key. So if you have had a chance to enjoy NCC nature reserves, or you just like thinking about these great oases of forests out in some more rural areas that are conserving habitat for owls, you can support groups like the Nature Conservancy of Canada who are working on owl protection by conserving large tracts of deep woods. Super. So we're coming up to the second half of our call. And I was wondering if there's any other cool owl facts or fun stories that you want to share with our supporters. Kristen, I will go back to you. Yeah, sure thing. One fact I had to know about owls before we started this call when I was doing my research was, can they actually turn their heads around 360 degrees? Okay, so I fact-checked it, and they can't. But what they can do is turn their heads around 135 degrees. And I'm sure everyone at home is trying that as I speak, and my head barely goes past 90 degrees. So that's kind of a neat thing about owls. They can do it on each side and then almost get this sort of fully circular view of their surroundings to help them locate prey. I also learned that certain owls can eat up to 1,000 mice per year. That is a lot of mice, particularly for some of the smaller owls. And the way they eat their prey is they just take them down whole. And then because their bodies can't digest certain things like fur or bones, they digest all the usable meat and fat, but then regurgitate a pellet, which is all feathers or fur or bones. So if you ever come across something strange like that on the ground, just know that it probably was evidence of an owl being up in the trees above you at some point. And another fact I thought was neat was some of our owls with flat faces. So picture that big, great gray owl I mentioned, or the barn, and that's barn like a farmer's barn, not to be confused with bard. Owls are a little confusing in that regard. That two names sound so familiar. That those flat faces are ringed with feathers. And that focuses sound, basically turning their entire face into a satellite dish or a giant ear. And you can imagine that makes it that much easier for them to detect the specific location of their prey out in the fields that they might be hunting in, which is pretty cool. But keeping in mind all of this about owls and how cool they are, what I think it does is it really emphasizes the importance of protecting habitats for all kinds of species, from the owls down to their prey and the entire food web that supports them, right down to the insects. So something we don't always think about is that native plants actually form the base of our food web. And native plants are able to so much more readily support native insects, which then feed the birds, which feed the small mammals, which feed the owls. And you can see that effect all the way up through the food chain. One thing I thought was really interesting was learning that a native maple tree can support 50 times more native insects than a non-native Norway maple tree. So that's both good for us to think about what sort of plants we're putting in our own gardens, but also good to remember that groups like the Nature Conservancy of Canada are protecting this already existing native habitat all across Ontario and all across Canada. And it's really important for the survival of species from the insect level up to the owls and beyond.
Okay, Mark, did you want to add anything? Any stories you want to tell?
Oh, sure. I just want to add one thing about monitoring. As I was talking to our science specialist, it's surprising how many locations do not yet have owl records, even within the Nature Conservancy properties. That's because we're often not out at night, for example. So there's lots of opportunities to learn more and to study these forest communities for the wildlife species that are in there at night. When I was invited to take part in this call, the first thing that came to mind is that I really wanted to tell this story about an experience I had in Bacchus Woods. Bacchus Woods is a large old-growth forest down in southwestern Ontario, not broken up by roads, beautiful trails, and so on. And I was studying the nesting habits of the southern flying squirrel, which at the time was a species at risk. So picture the scene. It's nighttime. I'm on my own. It's the end of the summer, so no bugs are buzzing around my head. It's very calm, so the wind, very little wind. And I had a spotlight looking for flying squirrels. And I was looking up in the forest, but the branches above. But then as I looked down below, there actually was a flying squirrel licking sap out of the base of an oak tree. And you know how in the spring, like this, around this time of year, sap runs through all the deciduous trees, for example. There's sap in oak trees as well. And in this tree had a wound on it for some reason. And the squirrel was lapping it up, like sucking a milkshake. He was so excited. He just paid no attention to me. And so I got to sit down right next to him, take some pictures. I should put a picture of those online at some point. But so he really paid no heed to me. I was taking field notes, just watching. And then I realized at the same time I was watching this flying squirrel, around me were calling owls. So there was a barred owl out in the distance. There's a great horned owl. And the spotlight owl. So I thought, flying squirrel is prey for these birds, and why would he not be worried about it? So, but at one point I realized the squirrel would get skittish, and it would sort of run around to this side of the tree, and then eventually come back to start feeding again. And I realized that it was coincidental that when he was moving around, seemed to be skittish, seemed to be more afraid, that's when the owls were not calling. So it may not be exactly why it happened, but when the owls, when you picture the squirrel saying, oh yeah, I know where he is, I know where the barred owl is, I know where the great horn is, I know where the other one is, so I don't have to worry. When they stop calling, that's when it's time to worry. So I thought, cool little vignette, and it's just like one of many little ecological stories that happen in these wonderful nature reserves. Now that was, believe it or not, 35 years ago. So fast forward 30 years, and the Nature Conservancy of Canada purchased back this woods with a lot of private government support, and now that forest is permanently protected. And those stories can go on and on forever. So that's kind of the cool part of our work, is it's a forever story, and these ecology stories will forever be there for you to experience once you have the opportunity to get back out in the woods. So anyway, thanks for listening to me. I love that story.
Thanks so much. Thank Kristen and Mark. It's been just a pleasure to have you share your knowledge with us today. And I wanted to thank, again, everyone who joined this special presentation. We know that there are hundreds of you on the call, and we're just so delighted you were able to join us. As some of you may know, the Nature Conservancy of Canada is in the midst of our $750 million Leave Your Landmark campaign. And I wanted to share a piece of great news. This campaign is the largest campaign for conservation in Canada's history. And it's amazing, but we are actually 95% of the way to our goal. That is an amazing accomplishment. I want to say thank you to everyone on this call in Ontario and everyone right across Canada who's helping us accomplish this. As always, there's still a lot to do, lots of nature to protect, and lots of stewardship work that needs to get done. But this 95% number means that over $720 million has been raised or pledged for conservation. And it really shows how many people really, truly care truly care about the land and the species we are working to protect. Kristen and Mark, who I can see are now cheering and waving their arms. I just wanted to say thank you for all of your support in the past. And if you've made a gift this year, thank you. If you're considering making a gift, I hope you do so. However, these are complicated times. We recognize it may be difficult for some of you to make a gift, and that there are many causes out there that are demanding our attention and support. We really want to take this opportunity to say thank you for your past support and your belief in conservation. Protecting our lands and waters is so vital. And we at NCC, we're still open. We're still doing our core business for taking care of and protecting Canada's lands and waters. And some projects we're still working on are acquisitions that might have started months ago, like we have one in Menacing Wetlands, a wetland system that's up near Barrie. We have an 80-acre property with huge, large old trees and open fields, which provide superior habitat for owls. And our conservation work here directed us to focus on this special property. This wetland has the same international designation as the Florida Everglades. And we wanted you to know that we're still hard at work making sure nature is protected, and we'll be closing on that property in just a few months. If you feel you are interested in supporting us, we'd always be delighted to have that support, but we do recognize these are unusual times. We are coming up to the end of our call. I just wanted to let everyone know you'll get an email from us. In that, it'll have a short survey. We are delighted to have so many people sign up for this, recognizing everyone is working from home or social distancing, and that calls like this or Zoom calls might be more appealing. We'd love to know what you'd be interested in hearing about and what medium you'd be interested in having those conversations take place on. I just hope that we can tell some more amazing stories that'll bring smiles to your faces. Please do take a minute and fill it in. And if you have any questions or you want more information about our campaign, anything you heard about this presentation, or want information to help put NCC in your will, anything you're interested in knowing about, there are staff ready and willing. We are working from home, so you might have to leave a message and we'll call you back, but we'd be delighted to chat about anything you'd be interested in talking about. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Be safe. Wash your hands. Be like an owl and socially distance. Thanks so much. Bye now. This call has been